Welcome. Mark and Sarah here from the Higher Wire podcast. We know you're listening because you want to stay ahead, to really understand the forces shaping the world of work.
And today, we're looking into some really fresh data and insights, stuff that's impacting hiring, recruitment, basically the landscape as it looked in April 2025.
It's a period where we've seen some valuable perspectives, particularly from industry voices like Bob Marshall.
That's right. Bob's April business articles have been quite insightful on current challenges. And it's worth mentioning his website, themarshallplan.org, just got a complete redesign, lots of resources there.
Good point. So today we'll touch on the latest unemployment numbers, what's happening specifically for professionals, those ongoing debates about remote work.
And of course, compensation concerns and the ever-present topic of artificial intelligence.
Let's start with the big picture, unemployment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data for April 2025. What did it show?
Well, the overall rate ticked up slightly. It came in at 4.2%.
Okay, 4.2. So a small increase from March.
Exactly. And it means, a few more people were counted as unemployed compared to the month before and also compared to April of last year.
But the labor force itself grew.
It did. Both the total civilian labor force, people working or looking, and the overall non-institutional population expanded.
What about people not in the labor force?
Interestingly, that number went down a bit from March, but it's still higher than it was a year ago. The common explanation is, well, maybe some people stopped actively looking for work.
And the participation rate?
That stood at 62.6% for April.
Now, for the people listening, especially recruiters, the numbers within specific groups are probably key. What about managers, professionals?
Ah, yes. For management, professional, and related occupations, the rate was much lower, 2.2% in April. That's actually down from 2.3 in March.
Lower than the overall rate and dropping slightly. What about based on education? College degrees?
Similar story there. For workers with a college degree, the unemployment rate was 2.5% in April, also down a tick from 2.6% in March, though both these rates are a bit higher than April 2024.
So 2.2% for professionals, 2.5% for college grads. That sounds incredibly low.
It really is. And it makes you think about established economic ideas, like Milton Friedman's natural rate of unemployment theory, the NARU.
Right, the idea that there's a sort of baseline unemployment level, maybe 4 to 6%, that doesn't fuel inflation.
Exactly. And when you see rates like 2.2 and 2.5% for these specific highly skilled groups,
Yeah.
it strongly suggests we're looking at essentially full employment within those categories.
Which means for recruiters.
It means intense competition for talent. You really have to be proactive, strategic in sourcing candidates in those fields. It's a seller's market for those skills.
Let's widen the lens a bit to the overall economy. GDP figures for the first quarter of 2025, they showed a decrease.
Yes, real GDP actually contracted at an annual rate of 0.3% in Q1.
What was behind that dip?
Well, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, it was mainly driven by an increase in imports and a decrease in government spending.
So more money flowing out, less government stimulus.
Pretty much. Although these were partly offset by some positive increases in business investment, consumer spending, and exports.
And weren't final sales still up?
They were. Real final sales to private domestic purchasers, basically consumer and business spending combined, that actually rose 3.0%. But prices were also up, both the overall price index and the PCE index.
It brings to mind something Bob Marshall often talks about, doesn't it? The focus on actual production.
It does. Very much echoes Henry Hazlitt's point. Employment is good, it's necessary, but the real goal is production. You can have people employed without a truly robust economy underneath.
Which ties into why zero unemployment isn't really achievable or even desirable.
Precisely. A dynamic economy needs some fluidity.
Mm.
Trying to force unemployment to absolute zero could push wages up too fast, leading to inflation. It creates instability.
Wasn't the lowest rate ever something like 2.5% during the Korean War?
Yes, and the economy faced adjustments after that. It also helps to remember there are different types of unemployment. Cyclical, tied to the economy's ups and downs.
Frictional, people between jobs.
Structural, where skills don't match openings. Seasonal, even things like minimum wage effects, creating a surplus of labor in some areas.
And factors like how long unemployment benefits last or shifts in GDP, they all play a role.
They do. So for you listening, understanding that some unemployment, like frictional, is just a normal part of people moving around, that can be useful context.
Okay, let's shift gears to worker preferences. The Korn Ferry survey shed some light on this. What are people saying about where they want to work?
Well, the global survey, quite large, over 15,000 professionals, It showed a really strong preference for hybrid or fully remote work.
So less desire for full-time in the office.
Much less. Globally, about 59% are currently full-time in the office, but only 19% want that. Almost half prefer hybrid, and a quarter want fully remote.
What about the U.S. specifically? Did it mirror the global view?
Similar trend, slightly different numbers. In the U.S., about 64% were full-time in office, but only about 20% prefer it.
And remote and hybrid preference.
Higher preference than current situation. About 36% preferred hybrid, and around 33% preferred fully remote. Interestingly, the U.S. actually had the highest percentage of current full-time remote workers in the survey.
So that preference for flexibility isn't going away. Organizations need to keep that firmly in mind for talent strategy.
Absolutely, it's a major factor.
Beyond location, what about money? Compensation is always huge.
Always. And the survey found widespread concern. Globally, 70% worried about cost of living outpacing their salaries. In the U.S., it was even higher, 72%.
Wow, nearly 3/4 in the U.S.
Yes, and it directly translates to job-seeking priorities, pay and compensation, number one.
Yeah.
Followed by job security, the actual work, benefits, and then flexible hours.
So competitive pay is non-negotiable right now for attracting people.
Seems that way. It's paramount in this economic climate.
Okay, let's talk AI. Artificial intelligence. How are workers feeling about it, according to Korn Ferry? Optimistic. Worried.
It's quite varied across the globe. India was the most optimistic about AI's benefits. Japan the least.
Where did the U.S. land?
Sort of in the middle, about 61% of U.S. employees express a positive outlook. But there's an interesting point about training.
Whoa.
Workers in developing economies like India and Brazil actually felt more prepared or trained for AI integration than workers in the U.S., Europe, or Japan.
That is interesting. Maybe a sign of different adoption rates or focus?
Could be. But there's also a shared concern globally. Nearly half, 48%, worried about AI potentially displacing their jobs within the next 3 years.
That's a significant number. Definitely something leaders need to address. Proactively training communication.
Agreed. Managing that transition and addressing those fears is crucial.
Let's zoom in on a specific sector now, healthcare. There was an AMN SIA survey about executive turnover.
Yes, and the findings were pretty stark. Nearly half, 46%, of the healthcare execs surveyed said they plan to leave their current organization within the next year.
Within a year. That's high.
It is. And even more immediately, 26% over a quarter plan to leave within the next 6 months.
Why such high turnover intentions?
The main reason cited was a reassessment of work and life priorities, largely stemming from the pandemic experience, burnout, and changing expectations.
But are they finding other opportunities?
Apparently so. Despite planning to leave, a huge majority, 74%, reported getting credible job offers in the previous 6 months. Demand for experienced healthcare leaders is clearly still very strong.
So it's less about lack of opportunity and more about wanting a change from their current situation.
That seems to be the case. But it creates major challenges for the organizations they're leaving or might leave.
I imagine. Filling those senior roles must be difficult.
Extremely. 80% of the survey respondents said filling positions was challenging, from moderate to extreme levels. And the same percentage, 80%, said they'd used interim leaders in the past year just to cover gaps.
What kind of leadership roles are becoming more critical in healthcare now?
The survey pointed to IT, cybersecurity, and, unsurprisingly, AI leadership roles gaining importance. And the biggest disruptors, financial pressures and workforce issues. It paints a picture of a sector under significant strain.
Okay, let's look at the broader private sector job changes. The ADP National Employment Report for April. What did that show?
It showed a modest increase, about 62,000 private sector jobs added in April.
And where did most of that growth come from?
Interestingly, small and medium-sized businesses. They accounted for a hefty 81% of that new job creation.
That's significant. What about pay?
Pay growth continued. For job stayers, the year-over-year increase was 4.5%. But for job changers, it was higher at 6.9%.
So changing jobs still seems to yield a bigger pay bump.
The data suggests so. It incentivizes movement for those seeking larger salary increases.
Did ADP show any sectors losing jobs?
Yes, there were some losses reported in education and health services, information technology, and professional and business services. Other sectors showed sort of moderate hiring. There were also regional differences.
What's the key takeaway for recruiters from the ADP report?
Given that huge contribution from smaller companies, the report really emphasized that recruiters should keep a strong focus on small and medium-sized clients alongside the large enterprises. Don't overlook the SMB market.
Makes sense. Now, the Joel Test report job openings and labor turnover survey from the BLS for March, what did that tell us?
Job openings were relatively stable in March, around 7.2 million. That number, though, is down by over 900,000 compared to March of the previous year.
So openings are still plentiful, but fewer than a year ago. What about actual hiring and separations?
Those numbers were pretty flat, not much change month over month. Hires and total separations held steady.
And people quitting their jobs. Layoffs.
The quits rate, that was unchanged. Still indicates workers have some confidence. And layoffs and discharges actually decreased slightly. So overall, a picture of some stability, maybe a slight cooling from the very hot market of the previous year, but not dramatic shifts in March.
And we always have to remember that 7.2 million job openings figure. That's not the whole story, is it?
Not at all. That's just the publicly listed openings. The BLS itself estimates that probably represents only about 20%, maybe even less, of the total available jobs out there.
So the vast majority are filled differently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Through networking, referrals, internal moves, and crucially for many listening, through recruiters working their networks and actively sourcing, that 7.2 million likely represents a much, much larger hidden job market.
Which reinforces the value of recruiters and networking.
Absolutely. It shows where a lot of the real action happens.
Okay, one last data point. The Help Wanted Online Index for March. What did that show?
The HWAL index, which tracks online job ads, actually saw an increase in March. It reached 116.2. That was up from a revised lower number in February.
So online postings picked up a bit.
They did in March. However, compared to March of the previous year, the index was still down by 6%.
Suggesting maybe a slight recent uptick, but overall online demand is still a bit softer than last year.
That seems to be the read, a bit of month-to-month improvement. But the year-over-year trend still shows some cooling in employer demand, as expressed through online ads.
So putting all this April 2025 data together, it's definitely a complex picture.
It really is. You've got these pockets of extremely low unemployment, especially for professionals, making recruitment tough there.
But at the same time, widespread anxiety about cost of living outpacing wages.
Right, and this persistent, strong preference among workers for hybrid or remote options. Flexibility is key.
Plus the background hum of potential economic shifts, the GDP dip, and the ongoing integration and worry about AI.
It means, for anyone navigating this environment, job seeker, employer, recruiter, you really need to understand these different, sometimes conflicting dynamics.
Indeed. So maybe the final thought for you listening is, considering all this data, the tight spots, the anxieties, the preferences, the tech changes, what strategic adjustments do you think individuals and maybe your organizations need to consider making in the next few months? How do all these pieces fit together for your path forward?
It's definitely something worth reflecting on, that interplay between the hard numbers, human desires, and technological shifts.
Thank you for exploring these latest insights with us today.